most things are not about a finish line. It's not like, hey, just do this for 30 days and then you'll be healthy. Just do this for 60 days and then you'll be productive. It's a habit. It's a lifestyle. It's a process.
Hi, I'm Helen Tupper, the host of HSBC's Power Up podcast, a podcast that is all about helping people to perform at their best. One of the ways that we can perform at our best is when we build helpful habits into our work. And who better to learn about habits from than international best-selling author James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. Today, you're going to hear James and I discuss how habits are formed, so the science behind habits. And we're also going to talk about how the impact of habits compounds over time. We'll give you ideas to build new habits into your work and actions so you can stop some of the habits that might be holding you back. I'm really excited to learn from this conversation today, so let's get started. James, welcome to the Power Up podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So it would be really good to start with the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, what is powering you up at the moment?
We recently had our third child, so I'm feeling very powered up as a parent right now.
That's not what I hear from most parents of young children. That's impressive. That's very impressive.
Yeah. You're also feeling drained and exhausted, but no, it's been great. I love being a dad, and so this has been a really fun period for me. All my kids are still very young, but this is our third one, and it's the best. I love it.
So when we are thinking about habits, how have they formed? What's the science behind habits?
It's a good question, and I think it's a good reason for why you want to understand what a habit is and how it works, because the truth is your brain's building them all the time. Like whether you focus on it and try to take control of the process or whether you just let life run its course, you're going to be building habits. So you might as well become the architect of that process and not the victim of it.
Yeah.
From a really high level, your brain is solving the repeated problems that you face. So anytime you come up against some type of problem consistently, your brain starts looking for solutions to that problem. So let me give you some examples. You walk into a room and it's dark. At some level, that's a problem and you want to be able to see. So the darkness is what we call the cue, something that kind of prompts the behavior. The next thing is you get this craving, this desire to have a little bit better vision. And so then you reach for the light switch and flip it on. So that's the response. And then finally, the lights turn on. And all that happens in like the fraction of a second, right? Like the act of turning on a light switch is a habit that nobody thinks about, but it's just a problem that we face again and again. And so your brain comes up with this little automatic solution to fix it. Let's say you come home from work and you feel stressed and exhausted from a long day. Well, that's a problem that you may face repeatedly. Maybe you feel that way once a week or once a month. Maybe it's every day. But the more that comes up, the more your brain starts looking for a solution. So some people, maybe they scroll mindlessly on Instagram for 45 minutes. Other people, maybe they go for a run. A third person, maybe they play video games for 30 minutes. But those are solutions to the recurring problem that you face. And what you start to realize, if you look at your life, you see, okay, there's like almost an infinite list of these little problems that you're facing all the time. Your shoe's untied. You figure out how to tie your shoes and so on. What are the odds that the original way, the first way that you learned to solve this problem is also the optimal way? You come home and you feel stressed and exhausted. What's the odds that the first thing you reach for, or the way that you kind of stumble into solving this problem of feeling a little bit stressed out, is the best way to do it? Out of the universe of options that are available, it's so unlikely that your first attempt at a habit is going to be the best way, right? And that's fine. I think what that does is it maybe gives you a little bit of permission to release some of the guilt. You don't need to feel bad about the fact that maybe you haven't solved things perfectly yet, but it does also give you a sense of responsibility where you realize, okay, once I see that this is going on, whose job is that to fix that? It's my job. I would say in the first, let's just call it 25 years of your life, you probably inherit and adopt and accumulate a lot of solutions that are maybe suboptimal. You're just not really thinking about it that much. And then you get into adulthood and it's like, okay, you can't really be blaming your history or your past or your parents that much anymore. Now it's become your responsibility and we need to start upgrading the solutions that we have to these problems that we're facing.
I thought your point around inheriting solutions is really interesting because I think you might inherit them from your parents
or friends,
unconsciously, or friends, and then you go into work and you're inheriting them from your manager, and
sure.
The whole idea of what works for them might not work for you, or what worked for you may no longer work anymore. Like it's quite a dynamic thing
in any area, whether you're imitating your manager or your coach or your spouse or your peers. what you want is to collect a range of options, right? Like we're looking to explore widely and to try to find a variety of ways to solve the problem, and then select the one that feels like it's the best one for you and for that situation and for that time, to your point about solutions changing over time.
Generally, if I'm trying to build new habits, are there any particular principles that I should focus on when I'm doing that?
For sure. So just to clarify what we talked about a minute ago, when we're talking about how habits are forming in the brain and the process that's going on, there's sort of 4 stages that all habits go through: cue, craving, response, and reward. So we kind of touched on that, a little bit. And so for each of those 4 stages, I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. So there's one for each step. So the first law is to make it obvious. You want the cues of your good habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. Easier it is to get your attention, the more likely you are to act on it. The second law is to make it attractive. The more attractive or appealing a habit is, the more motivating or enticing it is, the more likely you are to feel compelled to do it. The third law is to make it easy. The easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to be performed. And then the fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. So the more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more rewarding or pleasurable it is, the more likely you are to repeat it in the future. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, let's think about in the business context, you have some habit that you want to perform at work, and you're like, I keep procrastinating on this. I wish I did it, more consistently. Or maybe if you think about it through a team lens, and you're like, hey, we have this behavior, we keep asking people on the team to do this, but they only do it every now and then. Just go through those 4 laws and ask yourself, how can I make the behavior more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And the answers to those questions will reveal different steps that you can take to increase the odds that the behavior is going to occur. So there are many ways to do each of those things, and we can talk about that in more detail. But if you want a big picture view, like a high-level framework, what are we trying to do when we're trying to build good habits? We're trying to make them obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. If you want to break a bad habit, invert those 4.
Yeah.
So rather than making it obvious, make it invisible. Rather than making it attractive, make it unattractive. Rather than making it easy, make it difficult. Increase friction, add steps between you and the behavior. Rather than making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. And so now you have kind of like a high-level view for how to try to drive good behavior and hinder bad behavior.
How can habits help support a team's identity?
A lot of the time when we talk about this in the workplace, we use the word culture. People will say, what is the culture of the company? The true culture of any group is the shared habits of that group. And if it's not actually a habit, it's not really part of your culture. It's like something you came up with at the offsite one time, or like a slogan on the wall or something. But what people do consistently, the behaviors that get praised and the behaviors that get criticized, the behaviors that get repeated, that's the real culture. And so I think, certainly for senior leadership, there's an initial question of what are we optimizing for? What are we trying to build? So are we trying to reach a particular goal? Are we trying to show up in a particular way? Are we trying to build a team around a particular value or achieve a certain mission? That's a conversation that has to be had. But once that's decided, who are we trying to be? Then you can instantly start looking at all the behaviors that are happening around the company, all the habits that are getting repeated. Is this a habit that gets us closer to what we say we want or not? And so I like that question of what are your habits leading you toward, basically, or like, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? Or in a team sense, can our current habits carry us to our desired future? And what you find a lot of the time is you come up with a list of goals or objectives that you want, but then the behaviors kind of continue to get repeated that were there before. And so you have this new North Star, but you're still walking on this old path. And so, something needs to change. Not every outcome is accessible from each trajectory. Sometimes you have to change paths or change trajectories to get on the right path toward that outcome. And that usually means changing your habits.
I was thinking about sort of HSBC's focus on simplification, and you could talk in a team about kind of what habits would help us move towards that and what habits are holding us back. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's everything from, emails that are too wordy or too many emails, or there'll be a whole load of habits that will be counter to that sort of strategic intent.
I feel like a habit that is maybe the habit that's most underappreciated is the habit of reflection and review. especially in cultures and teams and organizations where there's just a lot of work that has to get done. People are so busy. They're like, listen, I got to get all this stuff off my plate. There isn't really enough time to think. And it comes back to some of the principles that we talked about earlier, which is, what are the odds that the way we're doing this right now is the best way to do it? It's very unlikely that you just have this optimal machine running and you guys just need to keep your heads down and keep working hard. And so the only way to figure that out is to have space to reflect and review. Every team member needs to spend a little bit of time each day or each week, probably each week, asking, is there a better way to do this? Am I working on the best thing? Am I working on the highest and best use of my, with my time and energy? And revisiting that question again and again, I think, is the only way that you can actually simplify effectively. You can't really get a hard and fast rule about how to simplify because there's always a new thing coming. There's a different project in 10 months. There's a new, objective down the road. There's some new scenario or circumstance you're dealing with next month that you're not dealing with today. The teams change, people change. Like there's too many dynamics, but if you can make time to reflect and review and continue to revisit this question of, are we working on the highest and best thing? Are we doing this in the best way possible? Is there a better path? You can accomplish a lot in a few years if you work really hard and continue revisiting this question of, are we doing this the best way we can? Is there a better way to do it?
And so I guess in your work, the 1% better or the compounding benefit of asking, so just a small question asked every week can have such a big benefit over the course of your career.
One of the biggest ideas, as you mentioned, one of the things that sticks with people the most from Atomic Habits is this concept of getting 1% better each day. And I understand why it's attractive, right? You scale it down, you make it small, it feels sustainable. 1% feels like something you can actually do. And it can really accumulate and compound in a fairly short amount of time. Give it a year or two and you'd be surprised where you end up. But we also all know people who spend their time doing little things that are just like trivial or minutia. They're just like polishing details that don't really matter. And so I do think there's a little bit of a caveat to it, which is, what are the 1% changes that really matter and accumulate? Is this a small action that accumulates and compounds, or is this a small action that just kind of evaporates and doesn't get us much in the long run? And I really like this question of, what is the work that keeps working for me once it's done?
So it's really useful to think about those kind of helpful habits for team and building that sort of reflection into your day. One of the things that I also have found from your work personally really useful is this idea of, when you're trying to create a new habit, thinking about sort of, rather than focusing on the outcome, I don't know, I want to read 12 books this year, thinking more about your identity. So, I want to be a curious person, right, is a kind of different way of focusing on it. Could you maybe sort of share that so that the people that are listening and watching can have that insight and maybe apply that to the habits they might want to create?
Yeah, this is a concept in the book that I call identity-based habits. And the real core idea is that true behavior change is really identity change. It's really getting you to shift the story that you have about what's normal for you or what you typically do, what's part of your identity, part of your personality. And we often talk about habits as mattering because of the external results they'll get us, because of those outcomes. We say things like, oh, habits are powerful because they'll help you double revenue or increase productivity or get in the best shape of your life or reduce stress. And look, it's true. Habits can do that stuff, and that's great. But I think the real reason, the deeper reason that habits matter is that every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So anytime you show up and do something, you are providing evidence of being that type of person. No, doing one push-up does not transform your body, but it does cast a vote for, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And no, giving one bit of positive feedback to somebody on your team does not make you the world's best leader, but it does cast a vote for, I'm the type of teammate who cares about the people around them. Making one sales call does not instantly make you like the top performing rep, right? But it does cast a vote for, I'm the type of person who does the most important task each day. You're trying to build up evidence of this identity that you want to have. And for all behaviors, doing it once does not change your mind about it. It's not like if you go outside today and you shoot a basketball for 5 minutes, you don't instantly think, oh, I'm a basketball player. But if you do it every afternoon for 6 months or a year or 2 years, at some point you cross this invisible line where you're like, you know what, I guess I have to admit that playing basketball is kind of part of who I am. And it works that way for everything. And so And at some level, these small habits that we're talking about doing something for a minute or 5 minutes, or it seems kind of easy to dismiss on a daily basis. Oh, what difference is that going to make? But at a much deeper level, it's casting a vote for being that type of person. And you can start to see how those days accumulate and the body of evidence accumulates. It's about getting to that point where you take pride in being that type of person. You take pride in that aspect of your identity. Because if you take pride in it, you'll actually fight to maintain the habit. Like if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym. Or if you take pride in how your hair looks, you have this like long hair care routine, you do it every day. I wouldn't know, but you get the idea. Like it's the aspects of our identity that we care about that we fight for. And so you're trying to find a way to link your daily habits, these little actions that you do, with this deeper story, this like through line that shows you the real meaning of those small actions.
One of the other helpful habits, in fact, something we've already talked a little bit about in the podcast series, is feedback. What have you learned about how to make feedback a habit at work?
It depends on what kind of feedback we're talking about, right? Are we talking about positive or negative? But there's various ways to showcase it. If it's positive feedback, there's a company that I worked with that had like positive Post-it notes that were put on a wall. It's kind of like a wall of, praise, basically. And that's a very visible thing, making it obvious. And it also just makes people feel really appreciated publicly and visibly, which is kind of nice. One of my favorites was a software company that I went into their office in Austin, Texas, and the number one metric that they cared about was how many websites had downloaded their piece of software. And they had this public goal of working toward 1 million downloads, 1 million websites installing their software. And so the first thing you see when you walk in the office was this huge projector that had the number of websites that had installed on the screen. And new websites were installing every day, so the number's kind of always changing. And I always thought that was a nice way to get instant feedback on whether what you were doing that day was leading to that number. It's like, okay, I'm showing up today. Did I help make that number go up or not? And it's a nice way to connect that to people's behavior. What you see is that feedback is often most effective when it's clear and immediate. The longer people have to wait to get feedback, the less the feedback loop kind of gets stunted. The growth doesn't happen quite as well. One of the best examples of this, and we can start to think about ways that we might be able to apply this to the workplace, is video games. So video games have tons of sources of immediate feedback, right? You're playing the game and you see your score go up in the top right corner. That's one little bit of feedback. You run through the level and you pick up a weapon or a jewel or a power-up or something, and there's some kind of sound associated with it. You see your powers increasing, for your character or whatever. Even the pitter-patter of steps as you like run through the level is a signal that you're progressing. And so what I like to say is, what are the signals of progress that people are getting? What you see, why do people play video games so much? Why do they get into them so much? Well, it's because they have lots of signals of progress, way more and way much more instant and immediate than they do in the real world. Like you don't get that level of feedback immediately in the real world. All right, so let's take those principles and think about the workplace. You look at your team and you're like, oh, we aren't moving forward as fast as I wanted. We aren't getting results as quickly as I wanted. One of my first questions is, what signals of progress do they get? When they show up and they do the right thing, what do they see? One of the challenges at the workplace is you show up and you work hard and then you feel like you don't have anything to show for it. You're like, oh, we've been meeting every Friday for the last 6 months and we still haven't shipped this feature yet, or this project is still incomplete. And it's very easy to get frustrated in that moment. This is one of the challenges with building better habits. You show up and you do the right thing, and then you're still waiting for that long-term payoff. And so you need sources of immediate feedback, signals of progress in the moment.
I wonder whether, as well as sort of using signals of progress as a way that people can sort of build in for feedback when it might not be so immediately obvious the benefit of it, you also talk about habit stacking as a way to sort of build better habits or make it easier to build the habit. And I'm thinking like there are lots of things that happen in an average day at work. I'm in meetings or I'm sending emails, or these things are already happening, and I'm trying to work out how I could attach feedback to something that's already happening, which I think, and maybe we explain what habit stacking is, but if feedback was added into something that's already happening, like a meeting, rather than something that always had to be added on and I've got to find a new time from it, then it would happen more frequently. Maybe if you could just explain habit stacking for people.
Yeah, I think that's a smart idea. So first, let's talk about habit stacking. This is a concept from B.J. Fogg. He's a professor at Stanford, and his kind of core insight, which I think is great, is that a habit is easier to build and establish if it's tied to something you're already doing. So let's take a habit that you do every morning, like make a cup of coffee. So let's say you wake up, you make a cup of coffee, it's like 7 a.m., and the new habit you want to build is you want to build the habit of meditating. So your habit stack could be, after I make my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. So you stack those two behaviors, you link them together. And what that does, it sounds like a small thing, but having a plan like that gives you a very clear and explicit place for the new habit to live. And so you wake up, you make a cup of coffee, you meditate for 60 seconds, then you can start chaining things together. You can increase the size of the stack. So you could say, after I make my cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. After I meditate for 60 seconds, I will write my to-do list for the day. After I write my to-do list for the day, I will prioritize the items in order of their true importance and start working on the first thing. And that gives you this little stack, this little it's almost like an on-ramp to a highway. It gives you a very easy way to get some momentum going in the right direction. People often build, a lot of my readers will do that. Maybe they have like a habit stack in the morning to get their day going, got a little morning routine. Then when they get to the office, they may have another stack that kind of starts there, so they say, I go to my desk, I hang up my jacket, I put my purse on the desk, I fill up my water bottle, and then I answer the first email or something like, just something that gets them immediately into whatever the work is. Habit stacking can be a very powerful way to build this entrance ramp to the behaviors that you want to do. And it gives you a very obvious place in your life each day where that habit should live.
And maybe for teams, it's like, where's the home for the feedback habit? Maybe it's at the end of our weekly team meeting. Like, that's the home for the habit. And we will always ask the same question. So what's working well at the moment? What would be even better if? So we don't have to think about what the feedback question would be. The meeting is always in the diary because we always have the team meeting.
Right.
And that's where the home will build the habit. I wonder whether that's kind of just a way that it becomes a less conscious thing that we have to think about all the time.
The general question that you just asked, which is what is the home for the habit, is a great question for any habit. So you can, once you have this principle of habit stacking, you say, okay, I'm going to layer it on something I already do. Well, not every behavior makes sense at a certain time, so you need to look at your day and say, what are the things I do repeatedly? And then where's the best place where's the best home for this habit to live? And you can do that with feedback as well. You can say, what is the appropriate time for us to ask for this? Where's the most reliable place in our day to, come back to this again and again?
So we had a conversation in the podcast series about goals and going after your goals. How do you think you can build in habits into your work that can help you achieve ambitious goals?
Sure. So, goals are good for setting a sense of direction, right? They're good for getting everybody rowing in the same direction, getting the team oriented. They're also good for filtering. Somebody comes to you and they say, hey, you want to do this thing? And then you can run it through the filter of your goals. Like, does this get us closer or not to that? So it's easier to say yes or no. But it's building a system of behaviors, a collection of habits that lead you toward that outcome. And if I was going to put a little finer point on the language, what do I mean by goal and system? Your goal is your desired outcome, the target, the thing you're shooting for. What is your system? It's the collection of daily habits that you follow. And if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. Almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So if you're sitting there wondering, how can we use habits to, achieve ambitious goals? How can we use habits to achieve ambitious outcomes? The answer is your habits are the path to the ambitious outcomes. And so I would say that, if you really want to make progress again and again, if you want to rise to the top and stay at the top, if you want to get exceptional results and continue getting exceptional results, you're going to need some type of process, some collection of habits to take you there. Now, of course, I'm setting this up a little bit like a dichotomy, right? We have goals and we have systems. So what we really want is both, right? We want an alignment between your desired outcome, your goal, and your daily habits, your system. And it's often underappreciated how important it is to build a system or build habits that connect to those goals. And getting those two things in alignment is the real key to achieving something ambitious.
Can we talk about some unhelpful habits that we might need to break?
Sure.
Because, and I say that as like, this is going to be personal coaching for me, Jay, so I will take all of your advice on board. But what do you think are some common unhelpful habits that are happening in work that we need to address either individually or as teams, perhaps?
Working on the wrong thing is the never-ending, always there, endless problem that all of us are facing each day. And if you take that idea really seriously, then you realize that most of what you do on a daily basis probably falls into that category. And there's only a few things that truly move the needle. So I have this concept in Atomic Habits I call the cardinal rule of behavior change. And the cardinal rule is that behaviors that get rewarded get repeated, and behaviors that get punished get avoided. But there's actually a deeper part of it, and I say this in the book as well. The real version of the cardinal rule is behaviors that get immediately rewarded get repeated, and behaviors that get immediately punished get avoided. And often the things that matter most in business are those things that compound over time, that grow and multiply with repeated effort. And they don't give you the immediate outcome that you want. Sometimes I feel like the two time frames that matter most in life are 10 years and 1 hour. So 10 years is shorthand for what are those big 10-year projects that we're working toward? We say we want to double revenue at the company. That's going to take a while. We say we want to have a thriving relationship and kids that we love. Like that's going to take a while to build, or whatever the thing is. So what is that big long-term vision, that 10-year thing you're working toward? And then 1 hour is what can I do in the next hour that leads me toward that 10-year vision? And if you can live in those two spaces, those two timeframes, much longer term than the average person does, and then much more short term and action oriented than most people are, I think you end up with great results, right? So you both want to have this long-term vision and this bias towards short-term action. Yeah. So it's like you're really patient with the outcomes and the results, but you're kind of impatient in the moment with the actions and the process.
It is a new way to think about work, I think. And I think it's a new muscle for a lot of people to build because, you might have some people who are just very future orientated, but they're not necessarily taking action. And then you have some people that are very action orientated, but the action doesn't necessarily accumulate to the bigger outcome that they're trying to get to.
And I think a lot of business in general nudges people towards some outcome that's in the medium range. So you think about what are the results this quarter, or what is the stock price this week, or what are we trying to do? What are our sales goals for this year? So basically all the goals are in the let's call it 1 week to 1 year range. And very few people are genuinely thinking about where do I want to be in 10 years or 5 years, and how are these actions leading us toward that? So you kind of get compressed into the optimizing for these medium-term results, which is not always the same as taking daily actions that lead toward the big 5-year result.
And would you say there are any other common unhelpful habits? That first one is big, like working on the wrong things is a really, really big and an important one to the impact of individuals, teams and organizations. Are there any other ones that you commonly spot that you think people should prioritize?
The two that I see the most are working on the wrong thing or communicating poorly. It is remarkable how often the problem is not actually what happens, but how it is communicated. There's so many examples of a decision gets made by some party that is maybe one department away or one level above or whatever, and they're not the people that are actually doing the work. And then the people who were doing the work because of what decision gets made or what change happens end up feeling like they were given a short shrift, or they were hurt in some way, or they weren't valued, or whatever. And that type of thing just happens endlessly. So if you talk to a lot of senior executives, one of the main things people say is, if I could just get the other members of this executive team to see it my way, it's like that comes up again and again. And so a lot of it is communication issues. At a fundamental level, those problems cannot be solved unless people talk to each other. And so what do the solutions look like? I mean, a lot of the time it looks like you need to be willing to have hard conversations. I was talking to an executive for an MBA franchise a couple weeks ago, and he said, hard conversations aren't hard for me anymore. And I was like, wow, that's actually a very powerful phrase. And his point was just, I've had to have so many uncomfortable conversations in my career that the next one doesn't intimidate me the way that maybe it would for somebody who's doing it for the first time or hasn't done it that much. And I have heard that phrase before, that your growth is often constrained by the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. And it's just, it's not possible for things to go smoothly all the time. Things have to be discussed. And so often in life, people will ignore giving feedback or giving an answer because they don't want to feel uncomfortable for 3 minutes, basically. You see this with all kinds of stuff. Like We had people who wouldn't RSVP to our wedding until like the very last minute, right? And then they're like, "Oh, sorry, we can't come." And you're like, "Well, you knew you couldn't come months ago, but you just didn't want to be uncomfortable for 3 minutes, right?" And so then they just didn't tell you until they were forced to.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing happens all the time in work. People don't want to feel uncomfortable, and so then you get into a situation where you delay the feedback. But delaying a no is not going to make somebody feel better about the answer. Like a quick no is almost always better than a slow, "Sorry, I can't do it." And so that's, it's a skill that needs to be honed.
And maybe the more you practice saying the hard thing, the easier it becomes over time. It becomes less hard for you to say it in the first place.
I think so. I'm not encouraging people to like go out there and look for drama and friction, right? But like there are things that need to get discussed that often get ignored.
Yeah.
And I think that question of what isn't being said right now that needs to be said, that's a great question to come back to. I mean, you could ask yourself that question every week. What needs to be said right now that isn't being said?
What I also love about that question and sort of making that a habit in how you're working is that anyone can ask that. Like it doesn't, so often we might think, the manager needs to ask that question, but I could be working on a project and I could be empowered to do that, or
Sure.
I could be in my team meeting
Yeah, you can
and I
imagine
could ask
somebody,
that question.
Anybody around the table can bring that up,
Yeah.
and it's a discussion point for everyone.
So we have covered a lot in our conversation. We've talked about kind of how habits are formed, some of the kind of science between habits. That's sort of, I always think of it as a cycle that you talked about.
It is.
With
It's
the
kind
cue
of
and
the
craving.
process of learning. It's like this feedback cycle. It's this learning cycle.
And we talked about helpful habits to build and some unhelpful habits that we might need to break. As we kind of come to the end of the conversation, if you were going to distill what we've talked about into 3 specific actions people can take so that habits power up their performance, what 3 things would you want people to take away from the conversation?
Sure. So, I give a lot of advice in these conversations, but I actually like questions more than advice. And so there are 3 questions I think you can kind of carry with you to help you think about your habits and what to focus on. So the first question is, what are we optimizing for? What am I optimizing for as an individual? What are we optimizing for as a team, as a department? And if you can get some additional clarity around what's really important to you, that helps give you a North Star to guide the habits. The second question kind of builds on that is, what season are we in right now? There's different times for different things. And it's really easy as an ambitious person, as an achiever, to focus on, we have this huge list of 5 or 7 things that we want to accomplish. But it may not be the right season for that. And so encouraging yourself to think about what habits can I leave to the side and what things need to be focused on in this moment, I think is critical. And then the last question is, all right, we know what we're optimizing for. We know what season we're in. We know what's important to us. But can our current habits carry us to our desired future? Are we on a trajectory where we say this is the goal? Are these habits going to take us to that place? And if not, then something needs to change. And I think, the habits that you have as an individual, the habits that you have as a team or as a group, they're going to change over time, and everybody's optimizing for different things. But if you can be clear about what you're optimizing for, what season you're in, and what trajectory you're on, I think you'll find that those small habits can take you to a really powerful place.
Thank you so much for your insights, for your questions. I think whether someone's using those to self-reflect or they're bringing them into a team meeting to discuss together, I think they are very, very helpful. And I personally love the power of your work and how it can help people with their performance as well. So thank you, James.
Of course. Thank you.